Hi everyone, my name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be sitting here typing this out, trying to figure out how to even start. So I'm just going to say it the way it happened. 14 months ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and for most of that time, my family posted about it like I was the bravest woman they'd ever known. My mother shared a photo of the two of us at Christmas with the caption praying for my warrior. My sister posted a black and white picture of me at my old job, captioned, "She's stronger than she knows." People I hadn't spoken to since high school were commenting heart emojis under those posts. And in private, in the actual real day-to-day version of my life, my mother asked me 3 separate times when my lease was up. Not how was your scan? Not do you need a ride to chemo? When my lease was up. I want to tell you the whole thing, start to finish, because I think a lot of you have lived some version of this. Maybe not with cancer, maybe with a divorce, or a job loss, or a death in the family. That moment where you realize the people who are supposed to love you the most are actually just waiting, watching, counting down until you're weak enough that they can finally step in and call it help. I'm not going to pretend I have this all figured out yet either, but I know how it ends. And I promise you, it's not the ending they were expecting. Let me back up. I grew up in a house outside Columbus, Ohio, with my mother, Linda, my father, Robert, and my younger sister, Brooke. Brooke is 2 years younger than me, and from the time we were kids, there was a very clear hierarchy in that house, even if nobody ever said it out loud. Brooke was the pretty one, the fun one, the one who didn't try too hard in school but somehow always landed on her feet. I was the responsible one, the one who got good grades, paid for my own car insurance at 16, and never asked for anything I thought my parents couldn't afford. I used to think being the responsible one was a compliment. It took me a long time to understand it was actually a job description, a role I'd been assigned quietly without ever agreeing to it. My dad died when I was 26. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. He left a small life insurance policy, split between me and Brooke, plus the house, which my mother kept. Maybe $18,000 each after everything was settled. Not a lot, but it was the only real financial safety net either of us had ever had. I used part of mine for a down payment on a 1-bedroom condo, nothing fancy, a mortgage I could actually afford on a marketing coordinator's salary. It was the first thing in my life that was completely, entirely mine. Brooke used her half to pay off credit card debt from a relationship that ended badly, and then, when that ran out faster than expected, my mother quietly started helping her with rent. Quietly, meaning everyone knew except me, until I'd ask why Brooke was suddenly able to afford a Cancun vacation. And my mother would get this tight look and say, "Don't worry about your sister's finances, Emily." I didn't resent Brooke for needing help. I resented the silence around it and being told not to ask questions in a family where my entire identity was built around being the one who didn't need help. The truth is, I needed help plenty of times. I just never asked. I'd learned somewhere along the way that asking wasn't a role I'd been given. So when I got the diagnosis, in March of last year, the first feeling before the fear even, was this sick little question. Now what happens to me if I become the one who needs help? I found out fast. The day I got the call from my doctor, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my office building. I remember the exact words. "Emily, the biopsy came back, and unfortunately, it is cancer." I remember staring at the steering wheel and thinking, very calmly, that the leather was cracking near the top, and I should probably get that fixed. That's the thing nobody tells you about terrifying news. Your brain doesn't go to the big, dramatic place right away. It goes somewhere small and stupid because the big place is too much to hold all at once. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring, like always. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen for a second." There was a pause. "Emily, you're scaring me. What is it?" I told her. "Stage 2, invasive ductal carcinoma, surgery likely followed by chemo." And she cried. I'll give her that, real tears, all the right things. "We'll get through this. You're not alone. I'll call your sister." For about a week, it actually felt like that might be true. My mother came to the first oncologist appointment with me. She held my hand in the waiting room. She posted a photo that night, just the two of us, her arm around me, captioned, "Whatever comes next, we face it together. Family strong, pray for Emily." 642 likes. I remember the number because I kept refreshing it that night, feeling, for the first time in a long time, like maybe I mattered to her in the specific, unconditional way I'd always wanted to. If you've ever dealt with a family that only shows up when there's an audience, you already know where this is going. But I didn't know yet. I was just relieved someone was finally looking at me like I was worth protecting. I should have paid more attention to what happened after the cameras, so to speak, went away. The first surgery was a lumpectomy, scheduled about 3 weeks after diagnosis. I asked my mother if she could drive me, since I wouldn't be allowed to drive myself home after anesthesia. She said, "Of course, sweetheart, whatever you need." 4 days before the surgery, she called me and said something had come up. Brooke's car had broken down, and she needed to take her to look at a replacement that weekend, and could I maybe ask a coworker? I want you to sit with that for a second. A car versus your daughter's cancer surgery. I didn't push back, because pushing back wasn't something I knew how to do with my mother. I just said, sure, no problem, and then spent that night calling around to see who from my office might be free on a Tuesday morning. A woman named Patricia, who I'd worked with for maybe a year and a half, said yes without hesitation. I want to come back to Patricia later, because she ends up mattering a lot more than I expected. The surgery went fine. Clean margins, the surgeon said, which felt like the first piece of good news in weeks. My mother called that evening to check in and posted, that same night, a photo of flowers she said she'd sent, sending all my love and strength to my brave girl today. Cancer warrior, mama's girl. I never actually received flowers. I checked with the front desk of the surgical center. Nothing had been delivered under my name. I'm not telling you this to be petty about flowers. I'm telling you because it was the first crack. The first moment where the performance and the reality stopped matching up, and I noticed. Chemo started about 5 weeks later. 6 rounds every 3 weeks at an infusion center about 40 minutes from my apartment. This is where things really started to show their true shape. I asked gently if anyone could come with me to the first session, since everyone says the first one is the hardest psychologically, not because of pain necessarily, but because it's the moment it all becomes real in a different way. You're sitting in a chair, and a nurse is hooking a poison into your veins that's supposed to save your life. And there's something about that that makes you want a hand to hold. My mother said she had a hair appointment. Brooke said she had work, even though I happened to know, because she'd posted about it, that she had the day off and was going to a friend's pool party. I went alone. I sat in a recliner next to an older man who was also alone, and we ended up talking for 3 hours about absolutely nothing. His grandkids, a Netflix show, the weather, because it was easier than sitting in silence with what was actually happening to both of us. That night, my mother posted a throwback photo of me as a little girl, captioned, "Today my daughter started chemo. My heart is breaking and bursting with pride at the same time. We are believing for a miracle. Pray for Emily, stronger together." 812 likes that time. Comments from women I'd never met saying things like sending love to your whole family and "You're all so strong." I sat in my apartment that night, nauseous from the pre-meds, completely alone, watching the likes climb on a post about a day I had spent by myself. I think that was the night something in me went quiet. Not broken exactly, just quiet. Like a part of me finally stopped expecting anything different and started taking notes instead. I want to talk about Patricia for a minute, because in a story full of people who let me down, she sees the person who didn't, and I think she deserves that. Patricia was 58, recently divorced, 2 grown kids who lived out of state. We weren't close before this. We'd go to lunch maybe once a month, talk about office stuff, nothing deep. After she drove me to my surgery, she started texting me every few days, nothing dramatic, just "thinking of you today," or "let me know if you need anything from the store." The kind of small, consistent thing that doesn't look like much until you realize it's the only consistent thing in your life. By round 3 of chemo, Patricia was the one driving me. Every single time. She'd bring a thermos of ginger tea because she'd read it helped with nausea. She'd sit with me through the infusions and not make me talk if I didn't want to. I never asked her to do any of this. She just kept showing up without posting about it once, not a single photo, not a single caption. She'd later tell me she didn't even think to post about it, because to her, it just felt like something you do for a friend who's struggling. It never occurred to her that showing up should be content. I think about that a lot. The difference between people who help you because they love you and people who help you because it makes them look like they love you. From the outside for a while, those two things can look identical. It's only over time, in the small moments nobody's watching, that you find out which one you actually have. Around round 4, I lost my job. I want to be fair here. It wasn't framed as being fired. It was framed as a restructuring, and I was told my role was being absorbed into another position. But the timing, 3 days after I requested a second round of medical leave, was not subtle. My manager, a man named Greg, who avoided eye contact the entire conversation, gave me a severance package that amounted to 6 weeks of pay and told me, without a hint of irony, that the company valued my contributions tremendously. I called my mother that night, shaking, trying to explain that I'd just lost my income in the middle of chemo, that my health insurance was tied to that job, that I had no idea what I was going to do about COBRA payments or my mortgage or anything. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Okay, well, don't panic. Let's think this through. What's your mortgage payment again?" I told her, $1,240 a month. She made this small sound, almost a sigh, and said that condo was always a stretch for you, Emily. I told you that when you bought it. I sat there, stunned, because that was not remotely true. She had never said that. She had, in fact, come to the closing and taken pictures in front of the building and posted, "So proud of my independent girl, doing this all on her own, Millstone." But suddenly, retroactively, it had always been a bad decision, a stretch, my fault. I asked her, directly, if there was any way she or Brooke could help me cover even 1 or 2 months while I figured out unemployment and applied for disability. She told me she'd think about it and talk to your sister. I never heard back, not that week, not the next. What I did hear, about 10 days later, was a notification. My mother had posted a new photo. It was from a fundraising gala for a local cancer charity. The kind of black tie thing where you pay $200 a plate to eat chicken and watch a slideshow. She was there with Brooke, both of them dressed up, holding wine glasses, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Spent tonight honoring cancer warriors everywhere, thinking especially of my brave Emily. We are all in this fight together. Cancer awareness, family first." $491. That's roughly what 2 tickets to that gala would have cost, based on what I found when I looked up the event afterward. $491 would have covered almost half of my mortgage payment that I'd been begging for help with for over a week. I sat there looking at that photo for a long time. My mother in a navy dress, laughing at something off camera, glass of wine in hand, while I sat on my couch with a pile of unopened medical bills and a body that felt like it belonged to someone else. I didn't comment. I didn't say anything. I just closed the app and sat in the dark for a while. If you've ever watched someone perform compassion for an audience while ignoring the actual person who needed it, you know exactly the specific, quiet kind of rage I'm talking about. It's not the loud kind. It's the kind that just sits in your chest like a stone. I think this is a good place to pause and ask you something honestly, because I went back and forth on this for months afterward. Was I wrong to expect help? Was I being entitled, somehow, wanting my own mother to show up the way she showed up online? I genuinely didn't know what to believe at the time. I kept telling myself maybe I was being too sensitive, too demanding, too quick to assume the worst about people who loved me. Maybe grief and fear and chemo brain were making me paranoid. I want you to hold on to that question because it's going to come back later, and the answer ends up being a lot more complicated and a lot more damning than I expected. By round 5, I was applying for disability, fighting with my old insurance company about COBRA, and trying to figure out how many more months I could realistically cover my mortgage using the last of my savings. And a small GoFundMe a coworker had quietly set up without telling me first. That GoFundMe, by the way, raised almost $3,000 from coworkers, from a couple of old college friends, from people who were, on paper, far less obligated to help me than my own family. My mother never donated to it, neither did Brooke, but my mother did share the link once, with the caption, Every little bit helps my warrior daughter through this fight. Please give if you can. Community, pray for Emily. She shared it. She didn't contribute to it. She used my desperation as content and let strangers fund what she wouldn't. I remember calling Brooke around this time, hoping that maybe, without our mother in the conversation, she'd be different. She'd always positioned herself as the fun sister, the one I could talk to more casually than our mom. I thought maybe that meant she'd be more honest with me too. I said, "Brooke, I'm really struggling. I might lose the apartment if something doesn't change in the next couple months. I'm not trying to guilt you, I just don't know who else to ask." There was a long pause. Then she said, have you looked into government assistance programs? I feel like there's stuff for people going through what you're going through. I asked her if she or mom could help with even a few $100s, just to bridge the gap until my disability payments has started. She said, I want to help, but things are really tight for me right now too. You know how it is. I did know how it was, actually, because 3 days before that call, she'd posted pictures from a long weekend in Nashville with her boyfriend. Hotel, brunch, a horseback riding excursion. I'm not saying she didn't deserve a trip. I'm saying things are tight felt like a strange way to describe someone who could afford boutique hotels and $40 avocado toast. I didn't say any of that to her. I just said, "Okay, I understand," and got off the phone before she could hear my voice start to shake. I want to talk about isolation for a minute because I think this part doesn't get talked about enough in stories like this. It wasn't just that my family didn't help financially. It was that I started to disappear from my own life in slow motion. I stopped getting invited to things. Not dramatically. Nobody ever said, "We're not inviting Emily." It was quieter than that. A family dinner would happen, and I'd find out about it after the fact, through a photo on Brooke's story. A cousin's birthday party. A small holiday gathering. Things that used to just include me automatically. The way air includes oxygen started happening without me. And nobody seemed to notice the absence except me. I asked my mother about it once, carefully, because I didn't want to sound paranoid. I said, "Mom, I noticed I wasn't at Aunt Carol's thing last weekend. Did I miss an invite?" She said, "Oh, honey, we didn't want to stress you out with all that. We figured you needed your rest." It sounded so reasonable when she said it. It sounded like care. It took me weeks to realize that being protected from stress and being quietly excluded had started to look exactly the same, and only one of them was actually about me. Meanwhile, the posts kept coming. A photo of my mother lighting a candle for Emily's healing journey. A post from Brooke about how watching my sister fight this disease has taught me so much about strength. Comments under both, dozens of them, from people telling my mother and my sister what wonderful, devoted women they were. I started keeping a private note on my phone, just dates and screenshots. I told myself it was nothing, just documentation in case I ever needed it for something. I didn't know yet what that something would be. I just knew, somewhere in my gut, that I needed proof of what was actually happening, because the version of events online was starting to feel like it might erase the real one completely. Round 6 of chemo finished in late August. I rang the little bell they have at the infusion center. The one they let you ring when you complete treatment. And I stood there alone, because Patricia had a dentist appointment that day. She couldn't move, and nobody else came. A nurse named Dana hugged me afterward and said, "You did it. You should be so proud." I started crying in a way I hadn't let myself cry through any of the actual treatment, not from pain. From the specific, exhausting loneliness of finishing something enormous with no one there to witness it. I posted nothing that day. I didn't have the energy to perform anything for anyone, but my mother posted that evening anyway. She'd apparently heard from Patricia, who'd mentioned it to a mutual friend, who'd mentioned it to her. A photo from years earlier, me as a teenager at a school dance captioned, "Today my brave girl finished chemo. We are so grateful, so blessed. This family has been through so much together, and we came out stronger. Survivor, family, strong, blessed." 140 comments. People calling my mother an inspiration. People saying things like, "Your strength as a family is beautiful to witness." I read every single comment that night, and I felt something in me shift from sadness into something colder, something closer to clarity. Here's where the story takes its turn, and I need you to stay with me because this is the part that changed everything. In early September, about 3 weeks after I finished chemo, I was waiting for my scan results, the one that would tell us whether the treatment had actually worked. That waiting period, if you've never experienced it, is its own special kind of torture. Doctors call it scanxiety. You feel fine physically for the first time in months, but your brain is convinced the other shoe is about to drop. During that waiting period, Brooke accidentally sent me a screenshot. I want to walk you through exactly how this happened, because the mechanics of it matter. Brooke and I were in a family group chat together, me, her, our mother, and our Aunt Carol. It was mostly used for logistics, holiday planning, birthday reminders, that kind of thing. Separately, apparently, Brooke had a different group chat with our mother and a cousin named Jess, where they talked more freely. One afternoon, Brooke sent a message to the family chat, the one that included me, that was clearly meant for the other one. It said something like, "Lol, mom, stop. She's not gonna actually lose the apartment that fast. Banks don't move that quick. Give it a couple more missed payments before we even start talking about dad's money if she has to file for anything. Don't want her getting suspicious." I read it 3 times before my brain fully processed what I was looking at. Then, about 90 seconds later, a second message arrived, this time clearly a panicked attempt at damaged control. Wait, that was supposed to go to the other chat. OMG, ignore that. Autocorrect is so weird, lol. Autocorrect does not generate entire sentences about my apartment, my bank payments, and my father's money. I sat there on my couch, scan results still pending, completely still, rereading those words until they stopped looking like words and started looking like a verdict. I didn't respond right away. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect these moments to play out like a movie, where you immediately fire back some perfect, devastating response. That's not what happened. What happened is I put my phone down, walked into my kitchen, and stood there for a long time, not really thinking anything at all, just breathing, just trying to let my body catch up to what my mind already understood. When I finally picked the phone back up, I didn't text Brooke. I called Patricia instead. I told her everything. The message, the fundraiser money my mother shared but never gave to, the missed surgery, the gala, all of it, in one long, shaking breath. Patricia was quiet for a second, and then she said something I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "Emily, I think you've known this for a while. I think you just needed someone else to see it too, so you'd believe it was real." She was right. I had known. I'd known in the way you know something is wrong with a relationship long before you're willing to say it out loud. Because saying it out loud means you have to do something about it. What Brooke's message told me in the clearest possible terms was this: my family wasn't just failing to help me. They were actively waiting for me to fail, waiting for the apartment, the thing I was most proud of, the one piece of independent life I'd built entirely on my own, to collapse, so that they could step in afterward, not as rescuers, but as people positioning themselves around what was left of my father's money, my portion of his life insurance, whatever was left of it, plus whatever assets I might lose or liquidate trying to survive. I want to be precise about this because I know what happens to Dad's money sounds dramatic out of context. Here's what it meant practically. If I lost the apartment and had to file for any kind of bankruptcy or financial hardship protection, certain assets, including a small remainder of my father's life insurance that I'd kept in a separate account, untouched, as a kind of emotional security blanket I never planned to spend, could potentially become part of negotiations, settlements, or claims, depending on how things were structured. My mother, who'd had financial conversations with my father's old advisor over the years and still technically had some informal influence over how that account had originally been set up, would have had an opening to insert herself into managing or helping with whatever remained, especially if I was too sick or too overwhelmed to fight for control of my own finances. In plainer terms, she wasn't planning to catch me when I fell. She was planning to be standing there afterward, picking through what was left and calling it support. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed running through 14 months of memories, watching every single one of them rearrange themselves into a different shape. The missed surgery wasn't really about a car. The skipped chemo session wasn't really about a pool party. The gala wasn't an oversight. None of it had ever been about logistics or bad timing or stretched finances. It had been a strategy, a patient, quiet, almost administrative strategy of withholding just enough to let me struggle, while performing just enough to maintain the image of a loving, supportive family. The posts weren't separate from the neglect. The posts were the neglect's alibi. I want to pause here and ask you something, the way I asked myself that night. If you found out the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had actually been waiting for your collapse, what would you do with that information? Would you confront them immediately? Would you stay silent and just start protecting yourself? I genuinely didn't know the answer yet. I just knew I couldn't go back to not knowing. My scan results came back 2 days later. Clear margins, no evidence of disease, the kind of news that's supposed to feel like the sky opening up. And it did, a little. But it was tangled up with this other feeling now. This cold, clear-eyed understanding of exactly where I stood with the people I'd spent my whole life trying to please. My mother called when she heard the results. Patricia hadn't told her this time. I'd actually shared it myself, mostly out of old habit, and she cried on the phone, the same practiced, genuine-sounding cry she'd used at the very beginning. "Oh, Emily, this is the best news. I knew you'd beat this. I just knew it." I sat there, phone against my ear, and said very calmly, "Thanks, Mom." That's all I said. Not thanks for everything. Not we did it together. Just thanks, Mom. Flat, polite. The kind of thing you say to a coworker, not a parent. I think she heard something in my voice because she paused and said, "Are you okay? You sound off." I told her I was just tired. It wasn't entirely a lie. That night, she posted the news. Of course she did. A photo of the two of us from months earlier, captioned, "God is good. My daughter is cancer-free. Thank you to everyone who prayed, supported, and walked this journey with us. This family is a testament to the power of love. Survivor Miracle Family Strong." 2,311 likes. The most engagement any post about me had ever gotten. I screenshotted it, not out of spite, exactly, more like evidence. Proof of the gap between the story being told and the story that actually happened. I think some part of me already knew I'd need that gap clearly documented, for myself if nothing else, because the version online was so loud and so convincing that even I had started to half believe it some days. Here's the part I want to talk about carefully, because this is where a lot of stories like mine tend to go in a direction I didn't want for myself, and I think it's worth explaining why. I did not call a family meeting. I did not post my own response online, laying out screenshots and calling everyone out in front of 600 mutual friends. I thought about it. There were nights I drafted entire posts in my notes app, detailed, with screenshots attached, ready to publish with one tap. I never posted them, partly because I didn't have the energy. Chemo takes things from you that don't come back right away. Stamina, focus, the sheer emotional bandwidth required to go to war with your own mother in public. But partly, honestly, because I realized something important during those weeks of drafting and deleting. A public call-out would have given them exactly what they'd always wanted from me. A moment to perform around. My mother would have cried publicly about how hurt she was that I would twist the story during such a hard time for our family. Brooke would have played the confused, wounded sister. People would have taken sides, debated screenshots in comment sections, and within 2 weeks it would have become content again. Just a different flavor of it. I didn't want to give them another stage. I wanted to take the stage away completely. So instead, I did something much quieter and much harder. I started rebuilding privately without telling them anything about what I knew. I'd gotten approved for disability payments by then, which weren't much, but combined with the GoFundMe money and a part-time remote job Patricia helped me find through a former colleague of hers, I was just barely covering my mortgage. Just barely. Some months I was eating rice and eggs for 2 weeks straight to make sure that payment cleared on time. I never told my mother any of this. When she'd ask in her vague, performative way, "How are you holding up financially, sweetheart?" I'd say, "It's tight, I'm managing." I stopped giving her real numbers. I stopped giving her real information, period. If she didn't actually care about the truth, she didn't need access to it anymore. This is the part I want other people listening to really hear. because I think it's the most important shift in the whole story. I didn't get revenge by destroying them. I got my power back by quietly removing their ability to use me. I moved my father's remaining life insurance money into a new account, one my mother had no informal knowledge of or connection to, with a financial advisor I found completely independently, a woman named Carol Reyes, who I'm fairly certain has never once posted on social media in her life, which by that point felt like the single most reassuring qualification a person could have. I started seeing a therapist, a man named Dr. Iverson, who said something in our third session that I still think about. He said, "It sounds like you've spent your whole life auditioning for a love that was never going to be given on merit. I think it's time to stop auditioning." I cried for almost the entire session after he said that, not sad crying, the other kind, the kind where something true finally lands in a place that's been waiting to hear for 32 years. Over the next several months, I slowly, deliberately, started pulling back from my family in ways that were almost invisible from the outside. I stopped answering my mother's calls on the first ring. I let things go to voicemail sometimes, just to see if whatever she wanted was actually urgent or just performative check-ins for her own narrative. Almost always, it was the second one. I stopped sharing details about my recovery, my finances, my new job, my new life, when she'd ask probing questions. "So is that little apartment of yours still working out okay financially?" I'd give vague, pleasant non-answers. "It's fine, Mom. How's Brooke's new place?" I want to tell you about one specific conversation because I think it's the clearest picture of where things had ended up. About 8 months after the group chat incident, my mother called me on a Sunday afternoon. She'd heard, through Aunt Carol, that I'd gotten a small promotion at my new job. Full-time now, decent benefits, a real foothold back into stability. She said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Now that things are looking up for you financially, your sister's having a really hard time with her car payment, and I was wondering if maybe you'd be willing to help her out, just until she gets back on her feet." I sat there for a second, almost laughing at the audacity of it, except it wasn't funny, it was just clarifying. Crystal clear, in fact. The role had simply shifted. I was no longer the failure they were waiting to profit from. I was, apparently, supposed to immediately become the resource again. The moment I had anything worth taking, I said very calmly, "No, I don't think I'm going to do that." There was a long pause. "Emily, that's not like you. You've always been the responsible one in this family." I said, "I think I'm done being that for people who weren't responsible for me when it mattered." She got quiet, then a little sharp. "I don't know what that's supposed to mean." I almost told her right then about the message, about the gala, about all of it. The words were right there, ready. But I didn't. I just said, "It means I'm focusing on myself right now, Mom. I have to go." And I hung up before she could turn it into something else. I know some of you are probably waiting for the big confrontation scene, the one where I lay every screenshot out on the table at Thanksgiving and watch her face crumble in front of the whole family. I thought about that scene more times than I can count. I wrote it in my head 100 different ways. But here's the truth, and I think it's a harder, more honest ending than the dramatic version. I never had that conversation. Not directly, not with screenshots, not with raised voices. What actually happened is smaller and somehow heavier. About a year after the diagnosis, almost exactly, I simply stopped showing up. I didn't go to Thanksgiving that year. I told them I had plans with friends, which was true. Patricia had started including me in her own family's holiday gatherings, the way you do with someone who's become real family, even without the blood tie. I didn't go to Brooke's birthday dinner. I didn't go to the small Christmas gathering at my mother's house. Nobody fought me on it. Nobody called demanding to know why. My mother sent a text each time, "We'll miss you, sweetheart," and then posted photos of the gatherings anyway, smiling, candlelit, captioned with things like "grateful for family," even when we're not all in the same room, blessed. I looked at those photos and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, not rage, not grief exactly, just a strange, settled kind of peace. The way you feel when you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying. So long your arms had forgotten what it felt like to be empty. I never confronted my mother with the screenshot. I want to be honest about why. because I think it matters. Confronting her would have required her to actually engage with the truth. And on some level, I'd finally accepted that she never would. People like my mother don't experience confrontation as an invitation to reflect. They experience it as an attack to defend against. Showing her the message wouldn't have produced an apology. It would have produced a performance of victimhood, a counter-narrative about how I was twisting, a harmless joke, how I was always so sensitive, how this was just more proof that I'd changed since getting sick. I didn't need her to admit anything. I needed myself to stop needing her to. That's the part nobody really prepares you for. The ending isn't always a dramatic unveiling where the villain finally sees the truth and falls to their knees in regret. Sometimes the ending is just you, quietly, walking out of a room they don't even realize you've left. It's been about 6 months now since I stopped going to family events. My mother still posts occasionally, things that mention me in vague, sentimental ways. Missing my girls type posts, usually around holidays. Brooke and I exchange the occasional birthday text, polite, distant, the kind of relationship you'd have with a cousin you liked fine but never really knew. I'm still cancer-free. My scans have been clear at every check-in since. I have a job I actually like, a small but steady savings account that's slowly, finally growing instead of disappearing. I have Patricia, who I now call my framily, which is a word I never thought I'd use unironically, but it fits. I want to tell you something I didn't expect to feel, sitting here writing this out. I'm not angry anymore. I thought I would be, for longer. I thought writing this would feel like setting something on fire. Instead, it just feels like closing a folder, filing something away that I finally understand completely. Instead of half understanding it for 32 years, my mother still doesn't know that I know about the message, about the gala money, about any of it. She still thinks, as far as I can tell, that I just drifted after my recovery, the way kids sometimes do when they get older and busier. She has no idea that the drift was a decision, that it was the most deliberate thing I've ever done. Maybe someday she'll figure it out. Maybe Brooke will let something slip the way she let the original message slip. Maybe she never will, and she'll go on telling people about her brave warrior daughter at galas for the rest of her life, never once connecting that story to the silence that's grown between us. I used to think I needed her to understand what she did before I could heal from it. I don't think that anymore. I think healing for me ended up looking like quietly building a life so stable, so full of people who actually show up, that the absence of the people who never did just stopped being something I noticed every day. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something the way I promised I would earlier. Do you think I overreacted by cutting them off the way I did without ever having the big confrontation? At the time, I genuinely went back and forth on it more nights than I can count. Some days it felt like the strongest thing I'd ever done. Other days it felt like cowardice, like I was letting them off easily by never making them face what they did. I don't think there's one right answer. I think some people need that confrontation to heal, and they should have it, loudly, if that's what their peace requires. I just learned that mine didn't require an audience. It required distance and time, and people in my life who showed up without needing a caption to do it. If you've ever dealt with a family that loved the idea of you more than they loved actually being there for you, you already know exactly the kind of tired I'm describing. The specific exhaustion of being someone's favorite photo and someone's last phone call in the same week, over and over, until you finally stop waiting for that to change and start building something else instead. I'm not posting anything about this online under my real accounts. I haven't told my mother I'm writing this. I probably never will. This is just for whoever needed to hear that the ending doesn't always come with a confession from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it just comes with a quieter life, built carefully, far away from the people who were only ever waiting for you to need them, so they could finally feel important. I got better. I got stronger. And the people who spent a year performing my survival for an audience never once noticed that somewhere in the middle of all that performing, I quietly stopped needing them to watch at all. That's it. That's the whole story. Thank you for listening to mine.